Heading into the first MDI Cup of Shadowlands, one of the biggest questions on everyone's mind was whether or not Pridefuls were simply just going to be shadow melded off and not dealt with, or if they were going to be played out, whether with trash packs or with other bosses, and it was the buff really going to be utilized. And it really started actually in this first map here of the MDI Cup, the very first map. We already got a really interesting look on it between Echo and the Quad question mark team, where Echo played a team entirely comprised of Night Elves, and they shadow melded off basically all the Prides, while the Quad question mark team, of course, is playing a Paladin, which can't be Night Elf, so they had to play every Pride. And this map came down to seconds between these two teams, and it was sort of a shock because there was some assumption coming into it that shadow melding off Prides was going to be overall more worth the time save, because they just didn't think that a lot of people didn't think that the damage buff was going to be significant enough. So throughout the rest of the MDI, though, the first cup, we saw a lot of different prides being played, not played, and so far there are 4 prides that have emerged that definitely seem worth being played. 4 different kinds of pridefuls that definitely seem worth being played. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ones that were played and how they were worth it and some of the decisions that were made. So this was I believe the 4th match of the MDI. So this was still in the first round, but it was the final match of day 1. This was between Obey Alliance and PI Me. And what we're going to see here in this clip is how these two teams basically approach the 20% Pride up to the first boss dying in Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, right? So what we're going to see is that Obey on the small screen is going to proc their Pride now at about 203 into the poll, or into the dungeon, sorry. And PI Me is going to continue killing. They're just a little bit behind here, and proc their Pride, and their Pride is going to get, actually active about, 215-ish, right? So Obey Alliance has a slight lead, but as we see again in the bottom left in the small screen, they are dealing with their Pride at the moment, where PI, they are all running away. Their tank gets in combat with it, jumps out, gripped out. They all shadow meld, and they completely ignore the Pride. So, but again, Obey is still fighting their Pride. PI Me has now pulled the boss. So what has happened is PI Me proc their Pride at about 213-ish is when it first spawned, right? Where Obey first spawned their Pride at about 203. But PI Me, now a couple seconds ago, about 226, has pulled the boss. And Obey is not going to, for quite a long time, we'll skip ahead a little bit, right? About here, at about 254, is going to actually pull the boss now. And this is really interesting because they have pulled 28 seconds later when they had about a 10-second advantage going into this kind of, sequence of events. So they have actually given up basically 38 seconds of time purely hitting the Pride. Now, the reason that purely hitting the Pride is generally considered inefficient is because single target is just that. It's just inefficient. Basically, no spec in the game does less damage to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 targets than they do to 1 target. 1 target, you can do, good damage for sure. You can do higher priority damage, but pretty much every spec does better with more targets. So this is a really key point that we see throughout the MDI a lot, where teams will try to avoid hitting one thing at a time if possible. They try to do big pulls because you get more damage and it's just more efficient with your time. And time is such a valuable resource in the MDI. So again, they are pulling the boss 28 seconds later, but what we see here as we go on is PI Me again has completely ignored the Pride, and in a second here it'll switch to Obey's POV. So as we see now in the bottom left, Obey has pulled the Pride in with the bosses, and it was very low health, right? They left it very low health. They all ran away and shadow melded off. They pull it in late, and this is a key point that they pull it in late. So now, as we can see here more clearly, though, they all have the Pride buff, so they all have a 30% damage buff, when Mr. Treeman is about 2/3 health. He's 63% health at the moment. So Pride is going to carry them through the next, whatever it is, 45% of the tree guy's health. And it's going to speed them up a little bit in that section over what PI Me did, right? Because neither team is popping cooldowns right now. They're all holding cooldowns for the damage phase. But the Pride is going to help carry them through. And then now, of course, with the Boomkin, which is a whole other thing, but the Boomkin damage, we'll switch here to their POV, and we're going to watch the boss's health just absolutely melt. You can see at the bottom of your screen there, Ingrid Malgich is just sort of dead. And this is a 12-second burst window that the boss takes extra damage, right? This is a 12-second window that they have just obliterated 90% of the boss's health in, and they move on. So they're going to move on. They're going to continue with, pulling. They're going to pull this next trash pack. We see they are Team PI Me is still dealing with the boss, and they're going to finally kill the boss at about 5:10-ish. So, Obey killed the boss at 4:13, and PI Me killed the boss at 5:10. So the total sequence between spawning their Pride and killing the boss took Obey 2 minutes and 10 seconds, and it took Team PI Me 2 minutes and 57 seconds. And again, this is with Obey having a 10-second advantage going into this. So the actual time difference between their two teams killing the boss was basically 57 seconds. It was almost a full minute. But dealing with the Pride, despite the fact that they pulled the boss 28 seconds later, it opened up a gap of an extra 40 seconds between Obey and PI Me. So this was a really great example in Mists of Tyrannical where abusing the Pride buff into a vulnerability phase is actually very powerful, and it can be overall a huge time gain through the dungeon. And this is something that I firmly believe we'll see for the rest of the MDI. And in all fairness to Team PI Me, their very next match where they played Mists of Tyrannical, they changed their strategy and they pulled the Pride in late, just like Obey Alliance did here. And for the rest of the MDI, PI Me did play Mist twice more, and they did pull Pride into the boss, and they were able to one phase. And that's just, that's going to be important throughout the rest of the MDI in this dungeon, that you can one phase that boss, even once Prideful is gone. Just one phasing that boss is going to be such a huge time gain. So the first kind of Pride is if you can hit a key breakpoint on a boss that ends up saving you a lot of time, right? The second kind of Pride is going to be one like we saw Echo doing in Theater of Pain, where you're filling an empty time gap or you're filling an RP gap, right? Where nothing is happening and you can't speed it up in any way just because the bosses are doing something. They're talking to you. They're, doing roleplay stuff that we don't care about for the purpose of the MDI. So Echo has just killed their fourth boss, so they have cleared all the wings of Theater of Pain now, and they're going to get in combat with a Pride that they have left at the entrance to this wing. They have left at the entrance to this wing, and they're going to fight this Pride. And meanwhile, Fragnance is going to run up and start the RP with the boss. And this is really crucial because, as we see here, this is a VOD of one of my Theater of Pain runs from an 18. From when the little portal to go up is clicked for the first time at 32:12-ish, when it's clicked, and we'll skip way ahead, to when the boss actually becomes active and you can fight her, is a 39-second time gap, right? And that's very long time, right? To just be sitting around doing nothing in a MDI setting, right? So instead, Echo is now dealing with this Pride while Fragnance, goes off and starts the role play so they can overall save time. And basically what ends up happening is they're going to kill this Pride. They're going to, which is wildly impressive, pull this Pride with Zelia at 30% mana, most of everyone on the team at about 50% health. They're going to pull the Pride, and with 4 people, they're going to kill the Pride in 37 seconds, which is very difficult. I don't think most groups could do this. But the point being is that now, because the roleplay is mostly progressed, once they click this teleport, instead of a long fly up, it's an instant teleport. They get up here, and there's only the last few seconds of anything going on, right? So they've taken what is a 39-second RP window normally and reduced it to maybe 5 or 10 seconds. And during that time, they are still gaining a Pride buff. And then they're going to pop Lust, and we'll fast forward just a little bit because they melt this boss in I believe it was like 56 seconds, something like that. They could kill this plus 18 key boss. It's not a Tyrannical boss, sure, but it's still a boss on a plus 18. So this was a really efficient use of time because they eliminate this RP window where they can't do anything, and they instead use it to do a Prideful, and they come out with a much faster time than if they had just gone up and then pulled the boss, right? So that's going to be like the second kind of Pride that you can do, is if it fills a time gap, right? And there's not a lot of examples like this right now in Shadowlands dungeons, but it is something to remember that in Theater of Pain, look for teams to do that with the last boss. So the third kind of Pride that became very clearly prevalent was the kind of Pride that lets you complete a dangerous pull, right? And this is getting away from bosses, right? We've pulling Pride into a boss, like we've looked at the last two examples. This is pulling a Pride into a trash pack that is particularly dangerous. So this was the upper semis between Perplex and Obey Alliance. And you can see on the bottom right and in the middle of the screen, both teams have their boss on 1% HP. They have basically identical trash. They have 1 death each. So they are tied. They are like as close as you can get, basically. The bosses die maybe 2 seconds apart. The difference here is that Obey Alliance in the bottom right is going to immediately wait for the angels and immediately start flying up to go do the very, very scary triple angel pull right in front of the last boss, Devos. Meanwhile, Perplexed is going to sit. They're going to let their healer drink, and they're going to pull this Pride. And if you watch this match, you already know how this, works out. But basically, Obey is going up while Perplex is doing this, and Obey is going to pull the 3 angels now, and we're going to have to skip forward a full 30 seconds for Perplexed to even be up here still. So there is a well over 30-second time gap between Obey pulling the triple angels and Perplex pulling the triple angels, and that time was purely spent killing a Pride. So obviously killing that Pride doesn't seem great because it's a lot of time that you're spending doing nothing. But as you know, if you watch the series, in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to be able to see it in a couple of seconds. Obey is going to get really deep into this pull. They're going to have, 16 stacks of the dot, 16 stacks of the damage vulnerability as well. And they're going to start bleeding out really hard. And in a second here, Holo, their healer, is going to die. And then very quickly, Chomp is going to follow him, and Shape Mage is going to follow after him as well. And they're all going to die. They are going to finish the pull, but now they are in full recovery mode, right? Because they're going to have to get the Pride off to the side here. We can see they have to run off to the side in the bottom right here, pull this Pride, right? And, run away, then battle res their healer. Meanwhile, as if you were watching the main screen, Perplexed with the Pride buff, both teams had all their cooldowns, they had less, but Perplexed with the Pride buff actually catches up. And they are going to kill the angels at almost the same time. And as we see here, they're going to run over into their corner here. And their Pride is only going to spawn maybe 3 or 4 seconds later, despite pulling the angels 30 seconds later. So, again, this is a great example of the Pride damage buff is a little bit undervalued, I think. It does actually save you a lot of time. It's not necessarily always worth the time killing the Pride, especially if you don't have cooldowns ready at that moment. But if you have the cooldowns ready and you can kill the Pride and move into a pack, you can save a lot of time with it. But the main thing is that this pull became much more comfortable for them, and they were able to actually complete the pull with the Pride buff because it took them so much less time. So the stacks of both the damage vulnerability and the dot that everyone gets were much, much lower. So they're able to do this, and then at this point, they pull the boss much earlier than Obey Alliance does, while you see Obey Alliance is still battle resing their healer and then casting a res while they have already pulled the boss. And Perplex is going to go on to win this map. And it's largely because of this. Because going into this sequence of events before Devos and, this angel pull, the teams were neck and neck. I mean, they were 2 seconds apart. And they're going to pretty comfortably win this series this map, by over a minute. So, in all fairness, Obey Alliance probably was able to pull this pull off in their time trial runs because they were playing Kyrian Boomkin, not Night Fae Boomkin. They were playing Kyrian Boomkin specifically for the AoE damage that it does, and they were probably able to do this pull before. And if they were able to do the pull without their Pride, it would obviously be overall a benefit. And now in the next MDI Cup, because those angels were nerfed and the damage vulnerability is instead of 2% per stack is 1% per stack, it is probably doable without Prideful. So Obey Alliance's strategy next MDI Cup is probably the correct one as opposed to Perplex. But Perplex did a really good job they identified that Prideful was still going to be worth the time investment, because it was just going to be safer for them. And this pull, if teams pull Pride into this, I would still understand because it's still a very scary pull even after the nerf. So it's something to watch out for. So those are the 3 kind of major kinds of Prides that we see teams doing. But I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about a 4th kind of Pride here, which I personally think kind of went under the radar. The casters weren't talking about a whole lot either. And it's quite simply, it's taking a pride buff into Tyrannical bosses. This is something that obviously on live keys, I would absolutely advocate that if you can take Pridefuls into Tyrannical bosses. Tyrannical bosses are pretty hard right now. They have a lot of health. So what we'll see here is that both teams are now in this room in front of the Mana Storms with these essential oils, and these lubricators. Take note that PIME is on 38% trash, where Echo is already on 40%. So Echo has already procced their Pride and all Shadow Melded it off, and they're going to do this pull now. And this pull for them is purely just some count that they need in the dungeon, right? And it works out that it's sort of a cooldown reset for them, before they go into the boss. But PIME, what they're going to do is they're going to fall behind here. Echo is going to run in, and we will see Echo is going to pull the boss well before them while they are dealing with their Prideful, right? So I'm going to let this play, and we'll talk about this a little bit. But Echo is going to pull the boss at 9 minutes and 7 seconds into the dungeon run. And we will skip ahead a little bit. And, a little too far. And PIME is going to pull the boss. Their time up on the top is a little bit off because they have 2 deaths. But at about 9:51 into the dungeon, they're going to pull the boss, right? So they're going to pull the boss 44 seconds later than Echo did. And this is partially due to the routing, right? They had a little bit bigger pull there at the end. They had to deal with the Pride, right? Echo's routing was just a little different. So the routes obviously are a little different, but there's a 44-second difference of time going into this boss. And this boss is quite long. It's a slog. The 2 bosses have a lot of health. There's a lot of mechanics you have to do that slow down your damage. And again, we'll skip ahead a little bit to show you the kill of the boss. But basically, Echo is going to finish this boss at about 12:11 into the dungeon-ish, right here, 12:10, 12:11 into this is when they're going to finish it. So their total time in combat with this boss was 3 minutes and 4 seconds. And PIME, meanwhile, we can see in the bottom right here, is going to also be finishing the boss very soon. And they're going to finish the boss, proc this Draw Mojo, at about 12:42 into the dungeon. So the thing here is that they spent total time in combat with the boss was 2 minutes and 51 seconds. So they pulled the boss 44 seconds later than Echo did, but they killed the boss only 31 seconds later. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but that's 13 seconds, right? That is a 13-second time gain that PIME made during that boss fight. And this is a boss that you can't really pull trash into. There's no trash in this room with them, so there's not a lot of other ways to make this boss more efficient time-wise, right? It's pretty much just a single-target slogfest. But because they took a Pride buff into this boss, they made up a 13-second time differential, which, funnily enough, covers up most of their time loss for the deaths that they had in their invis skip right before this boss. So taking that Prideful buff in was actually pretty valuable. And this is something that I don't want to show too many examples of this, but this is something that, it's applicable to much more than just the Mana Storms boss in the other side, right? Taking Pridefuls into Tyrannical bosses in many instances is actually going to be a time save. I mean, we saw a good example of this in the Mists. The Mists is a much more specific example because they were hitting a specific breakpoint, where they were one-phasing the boss during a damage phase, right? And one-phasing that boss during the damage phase is so important because outside of the damage phase, your kill time is going to be much lower, right? But even in bosses without these sort of damage phases, just pulling a Pride into a Tyrannical boss is very valuable. The time spent doing it can actually be made up quite easily, right? As we see in the other side. So, Prideful is still a very complicated topic in the MDI, and it looks like Blizzard is kind of trying to stop people from skipping Prides with some of their Shadow Meld changes, but from what I've heard, it's not working. The way that they tried to fix it is not actually working. So going into Cup 2, it's very possible we still see a lot of Prideful skips, and I think it's really important that teams go back and they sort of reevaluate all of their Pride skips and if it is actually saving them any time. And if it is saving them time, where is it saving them time, right? Is it saving them time during RP, like it is in Theater of Pain, or are they using it to make a pull possible, like we saw in the Spires of Ascension, or even some of the big pulls that teams are doing with trash onto bosses, right? You might need a Pride there. So it's really important that teams go back and look at their routing and just make sure that they actually have Pride for times when it's valuable, because there are going to be times when having Pride is actually the right play instead of skipping it. So that's going to be all for this video. This is a little long. Thanks for sitting through all of it. If there are any other topics from the MDI that you're curious about, let me know. Leave a question in the comments, and I will, if I like the suggestion, I'll probably make a video about it. I do have a couple other videos coming out soon for the first MDI Cup, but besides that, I'm looking forward to the second one Cup. So thanks, everybody. See you around.